This sermon is titled Divine Names, How a Quaker Sees the Divine, to be delivered by Harry Eggleton. Harry and his wife Anne are very dear friends to Ames and me. We met them many years ago on one of our walks on Fiscalini Ranch and have been close ever since. And they're both friends and friends with a capital F. You'll find out why the F is capitalized from Harry's talk. Anne and Harry moved to Cambria about 12 years ago and live on Lodge Hill just above Marine Terrace. Harry is a semi-retired management consultant and fully retired HR consultant from Cal Poly. They have two great sons, two wonderful daughters-in-law, and are proud first-time grandparents with a brand new 1-month-old grandson, Silas. And they'll show you pictures if you ask. Harry was raised on Christian Science, and Anne was raised as a Catholic, but found comfort and connection together as Quakers over 30 years ago. May I present Harry Eggleton.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. I hope you can see my screen. Let me know if you can't, but it's really a pleasure to be with you. I am not in Cambria right now. My wife and I are visiting my father-in-law in Monterey. So it's really nice to be here with you. So I get to talk about divine names, how a Quaker sees the divine. And before I start, let me say some things about my presentation. And first of all, I'd like to say this. I don't speak for all Quakers. There's a huge range of perspectives for Quakers, from very liberal Quakers, of which I am one, to even evangelical Quakers. So I can't hope to speak for all Quakers, but I welcome the opportunity to provide to you my perspective. I also figure we're all on the same path, so I know that you'll be patient with me. But if I do say something that may be a little off kilter to you, please, I'll stick around for Q&A at the end, or express it at the time, however you want to handle that. But I appreciate your patience as we go forward. I'm going to give you a quiz, a 3-question quiz, because I'll bet you're familiar with Quakers a little bit already, and some of you wake up to this guy every morning. Question number 1, and by the way, there is no recording of grades here. I'm just going to do my 3-question quiz to show you how much you know or may know already about Quakers. Question number 1, true or false? The Quaker Oats Company was obviously started by Quakers. Okay, whether you said true or false, I have to let you know that it is indeed false. Quakers have nothing to do with the Quaker Oats Company. See, the former owners, whose name were Henry Seymour and William Heston, wanted a name for their company, their granary and their bakery. They wanted a name that inspired confidence and honesty and good dealings. And Quakers had a reputation for that. They established the company in the 1800s, late 1800s. Quakers were known for that, so they used the name. So Quakers have nothing to do with Quaker Oats, but Quakers have started these other companies, some of which you may recognize. And here are some Quakers as well that you may or may not know are Quakers or have been Quakers. So there's several around there, names that you may recognize, like Edward R. Murrow and Bonnie Raitt, and even in the context of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, Kevin Bacon's a Quaker. Okay, question number 2, true or false? But that guy on the Quaker Oats box, that's William Penn, right? True or false? Well, I don't really know. See, here is a picture of the guy on the Quaker Oats box on the left, and then you'll see William Penn also on the left below him. So in the beginning, there were statements by the Quaker Oats Company that, yes, this is William Penn, very emphatically. And in 1909, they put out this pamphlet that said, yeah, that's William Penn. However, if you go to the Quaker Oats Company right now, they will tell you that's not William Penn. Now, there may be some conflict with the family or something. Who knows what the reason is? It's up to you to determine whether that's William Penn or not. I kind of think it is, but we can't really know. Okay, third and final question, true or false? Quakers are called Quakers because of their uncanny ability to predict earthquakes. That is actually false. Quakers actually was a diminutive. It was an insult to, here's the formal name, the Religious Society of Friends. And that's why Mary Ann referred to me as a friend with capital F. That's how Quakers refer to themselves. The story about the term Quakers goes back to its founder. I think there's a little bit of myth to it where they said that George Fox, who was being persecuted, came before an English magistrate who became frustrated with Fox and said, "George Fox, you do nothing but quake in the presence of your God, not in the presence of the court." And George Fox said, "Yeah, well, yeah, that's pretty much true." And from then on, Quakers were referred to Quakers. We don't care what you call us. Quakers is fine. We usually refer to ourselves as friends within the community, but whatever you want to call us, it's just fine with us. Quakers are in somewhere in the long line of Christianity. It is a Christian-based, Protestant-based religion. With your indulgence, here is my slide that shows the whole 2,000 years of Christianity in one slide. But we get down to the bottom where we start to have Protestants, and then we get this bowl of spaghetti. That's what the drawing is. And Quakers are right there, 1640s. That's when Quakerism began by these people, the founders. George Fox and Margaret Fell, later became Fell Fox as well. I want to tell you about Quakers, but I want to emphasize four things, and this will get into the substance of what I want to talk to you about. First thing is, Quakers affirm a phrase that's important to us called that of God. We have a peculiar approach to worship. Quakers have no hierarchy. There is no governance, no apparent governance to what Quakers do to govern themselves. And we have these testimonies, these things called testimonies. So I want to take each one of those individually, starting with Quakers affirm that of God. This phrase, that of God, meaning there is that of God in every individual, may have similarity to UU's. I'm seeing that already. You may as well. But Quakers, for over 400 years, have emphasized that of God. We don't have a creed. We don't do that like the Nicene Creed or any other sanctioned statement or any kind of affirmation. We don't do that. We don't do altar calls. We don't demand admission of sins. We simply don't do that. There is a branch of Quakers that do that. They're evangelical Quakers, but I'm more toward the liberal side, and we simply don't do that. Now, there is a Quaker in Whittier. By the way, I belong to Whittier Friends Meeting, and I also attend Central Coast Friends Meeting. But there's a Whittier friend that writes it this way, the concept of that of God. She writes, her name is Lolita Barrett. She writes, "For me, grace and forgiveness are human concepts. They come from the idea that humans start out as sinful and somehow are undeserving of a relationship with God and God's love. But for me, God is just bigger than that. God is God. There's nothing we can do to deserve God's love and nothing we can do to lose God's love, because love is love. And to say that God's love is somehow conditional, and to think that God's forgiveness and mercy comes through some undeserved gift called grace just seems redundant. Well, yeah, the God I know cannot withhold compassion. God does not punish, is not retributive, and God does not seek vengeance. It's not God's nature as love. God, of course, may be disappointed or dismayed or may even mourn when we don't choose for our highest good. but God simply remains with us loving and lures us beyond to a better life, a life of knowing God is love. So Quakers for over 400 years have started with the basis of that of God, people as that of God, expressing that of God. We do not start with people as sinful, requiring some kind of, I don't know, action that brings us to get right with our spiritual father or mother. We don't start there. We start with that of God in every person. And that's central to Quakerism and especially liberal Quakerism. Point number two, Quakers have a peculiar approach to worship. There are what we call programmed and unprogrammed worships, and even semi-programmed worships, services, kind of like this. If you go to a semi-programmed worship or even a programmed worship, by the way, each meeting, which is what Quakers call their individual churches, each meeting is individual. Um, if you attend a programmed meeting, it will have, similar to what I'm experiencing now, hymns and readings and those types of things. But if you, and by the way, here is and the Whittier meeting is a semi-program meeting. And so you can see the agenda. There is a key part there down toward the bottom called communion in the manner of friends. That would be similar to the time that we just spent in meditation. The word communion is significant to Quakers because communion to us means communing with God. It does not mean taking the bread and the wine as in other Protestant faiths. It means kind of almost literally with God for that still small voice of the divine, right? And if you go to an unprogrammed meeting, here's the agenda, get ready, here it is. That's the Central Coast Friends meeting agenda. You walk in, take a seat, and wait to listen to that still small voice. And if you have what Quakers call a leading that you'd like to share with others, you're welcome to do that. That can be your own experiences, what God, the divine, is telling you to share. It can even be a song if you'd like. But often as not, we sit in silence, in communal silence, awaiting the still small voice that comes to us from that silence, right? So Quaker meeting houses, that's what we call our edifices or gathering places, right, are very, very simple. And to me, very beautiful in their simplicity. These are two images. I particularly love the one on the bottom. It's a typical old Quaker meeting house. We sit facing each other wherever we want to sit because the leading can come to the individual. Now, here's a typical 3 meetings in progress. It's people awaiting the leading. And what happens is maybe you'll have a leading and stand, as you see in the lower left, and share that with the rest of the community. This is communion in the manner of friends. So Quakers have no hierarchy and a unique approach to governance. Just so you know, nobody's in charge of a Quaker meeting. We put it back on God. And so our meetings for governance are called meeting for worship for the purpose of doing business. So usually we meet for an hour and then we have food, we have lunch. But that's how we get the business of the meeting done. We start in silence and we close in silence, and we govern as a congregation on behalf of what the divine wants us to do. So when we can't agree, we either call a moratorium and put off the decision, but we never vote, because voting means the majority rules, and we don't come to what looks like consensus to a visitor, because a consensus means we all agree. The part where we may be in consensus is we all agree that this is what God wants us to do. So to say no person is in charge of a Quaker meeting is absolutely true. the meeting's business to the divine through God's leading. And then we have these things called testimonies that was mentioned in the introduction, and I'm going to share those with you now. Testimonies may be similar to the principles. I'll let you decide that. I think there's some overlap. Quaker testimonies are expressions of commitment to put beliefs into practice. We're kind of dedicated in our own way. We don't write these out or anything. They're meant to be how you let your life speak. That's a Quaker phrase, let your life speak. So whereas principles you can adhere to, and that's a sense of your personal dedication, for Quakers, we take a slightly different view, but maybe there's overlap, where we say, these are ways that you can let your life speak. And so they do spell out spices, as was mentioned. But here's what I did. I think there's a 92% overlap between UU's principles and Quaker testimonies. And the reason that I'm saying that is because before I prepared for this interaction with you, I went online, and you can go online and take these little quizzes that ask you your religious and spiritual leadings, your preferences and predilections, and then they tell you what faith practice you should be part of. So I took it, and it found out, right, the results were, Harry, you should be 100% Quaker. But the next in line was, Harry, you should be 92% UU. So I think that's where it comes, is there's an overlap between the principles and the testimonies. But let me describe the testimonies and see if you see a similarity. Simplicity is key to Quakers, absolutely key to us. If you go back to the guy on the Quaker Oats box, his dress then was called Quaker Gray. It was the most simple costume of the day, meant to be more functional than fashionable. And you'll see that with Quakers. We tend not to go for ostentation of any time. We tend to just lead simple lives. And when we have a meeting, that is what we call our church service. When we have a meeting, it's come as you are. Literally just come as you are. Simple living, it's expressed in a lot of ways. Among Quakers, every once in a while, for emphasis, we'll use plain speech, which means we'll use the terms thee and thy and thou. And I can let you know later maybe why that is. There was a great movie, or is a great movie, old movie called and it's, gosh, I think Dorothy McGuire. It's a great old movie about Quakers in the Civil War. But the song that is sung, the main theme song, is called Thee I Love. So we use plain speech every once in a while now just for emphasis. Another thing is, we don't use titles. We don't use titles among ourselves like Dr. So-and-so, or even Mr. or Ms. or Dean or Governor. We just don't do that. The assumption is, if you use a title, it's an attempt to maybe put one person above the other, and we really are serious about that of God element to how we interact with each other. So we're all first name. We just go by our first names. So simplicity is really critical, and it means querying ourselves in the way that, do we have enough? And that's enough, right? Okay, Quakers are pacifists. By tradition, we are pacifists. We have been since the 1600s. And that's a personal decision that we respect for each Quaker to make. There are two quotes that I love. One is by Wendell Berry, who's an author and an activist. And he said, look, if we are serious about peace, then we must work for it, peace, as ardently, seriously, continuously, carefully, and bravely as we have ever prepared for war. And Gandhi, most of you will know this quote, there are many causes that I would die for, but there is not a single cause I would kill for. Right? Integrity is the next thing. And we follow an admonition to let your life speak, so you should act honestly. Now, some kind of quirky things about that is Quakers typically choose not to swear to tell the truth in a court of law. We will not do that because the assumption is if we swear in a court of law, what are we doing the rest of the time, right? So integrity means holding forth and not swearing. And I'll be honest with you, I don't swear, but every once in a while I do cuss, but don't tell my wife. Anyway, community, huge to Quakers, but kind of informal. Quakers believe that we are gifted by the divine and we have kind of a sense of obligation to figure out how we can contribute to the community. And you'll see that historically, Friends have been involved in things like prison reform, and abolition. Levi Coffin was named the president of the Underground Railroad, and he was a Quaker. We've been active in those types of things, but it's a personal decision as to how you want to use your gift community. Quakers have been involved in education for a long time. There are a lot of Quaker colleges around. Colleges like, oh gosh, there's Guilford and Bryn Mawr and Swarthmore and just a number of small Quaker colleges around. One of the interesting, not college, but schools around is a school outside of Washington, D.C. called Sidwell. Sidwell is where a lot of politicians, ever since Teddy Roosevelt's time, have sent their kids, and Obama's kids have gone to Sidwell as well. Politicians' kids from both sides. Yeah, so we're into education. Equality, huge to Quakers. Quakers, men and women have been Quaker pastors since the beginning, and there are famous Quaker women like Margaret Fox and Mary Dyer and Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Fry, and the list goes on and on. So equality has been a part of it for over 400 years. And then finally, sort of new is stewardship of the earth's resources. We recognize that we are here in a divinely inspired gift to us, and that is the earth that we share, and we need to care for it. So those are the Quaker testimonies, and I took a try at mapping, and you're welcome to do this. You'll see the UU principles on the right and the Quaker testimonies on the left. You may see some similarities. I invite you to do that, but I see the similarities. Now, the last thing that I want to do is I want to go back kind of to where I started with the title of my my presentation, which is dealing with divine names. And I have to go back to the principle of that of God. And you can see that it is sort of inspired by the quote from the New Testament in John, that there was a true light which lighteth every man and woman that cometh into the world. And we call the divine the light a lot, the light of God. And it's particularly meaningful to me. You know, for understanding, there was a suggestion by Jesus that you go to the divine like a child. And so there's an interesting kind of we call Sunday school, first day school. There's an interesting exercise that you'll see people do, and they'll say, write a letter to God to kids. And it's interesting to see what they come up with. Here are some examples, right? Dear God, please change the taste of asparagus. It's grass. And dear God, in school we read that Thomas Edison made light, so I bet he stole your. How do you feel about that? And dear God, did you mean to make the giraffe look like that, or was you having a bad day? And dear God, instead of letting people die and having to make new ones, why can't you keep the ones you got now? Just asking. And this one I think is most interesting because Isaac wrote, dear God, why do we keep calling you God if your real name is Harold? And his Sunday school teacher went back to him and said, Isaac, what are you talking about? And Isaac replied, well, you taught us, our Father who art in heaven, Harold be thy name. Okay, we have a lot of names for God, and here is just a list of references to God in the Old and the New Testament. And in the Old Testament, if you go back to Hebrew, here are names for God: Adonai, Elohim, El Shaddai, Jehovah, which is a kind of a morphism from German, the YHWH thing. And you'll see that in Jewish prayers too. I don't speak Hebrew, but I've been to many Hebrew services, and there's prayers that begin with these words. Forgive me if you speak Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, and it goes on, which literally means, or sort of, blessed are you, Lord God of the universe, kind of a thing, right? When Jesus was asked by his disciples, how do we pray? Jesus changed the whole tone of everything by saying, here's how you pray. And I'm going to do it first in Aramaic and then talk about it. He said, Abun Dibishmaya, Niskadishtuk. Now that first word turned it around, Abun. Abun meaning father, mother. The source of your birth, right? The father, the divine parent. So in that one response, to my mind, and very important to me, it was turned around because we go from a ruler out there, a ruler of the universe, to a God that is within us. That of God, the light within, the inward light, the inner light, spirit of the divine, seed of God, source of truth and power and unity. So maybe that little kid who said, God's name is Harold, maybe Isaac was right. Maybe it is Harold. Or maybe because that of God is in each of us, maybe God's name is Randy or Marianne or John. Maybe God's name is George or Brianna or Dante. Or maybe God's name is your name. And every time you meet another person, you're meeting God. Thank you, friends.